worry is not so much inflation, it's what inflation does to corporate America. That's the mystery.
Under 2 weeks away from earnings season with JP Morgan, October 13th. Lisa Shallett's words of Morgan Stanley, Tom. Corporate America has some explaining to do.
Well, they're going to do explaining. It's going to be in the conference calls, and, nobody's going to pay attention to revenue. Maybe you get a nominal GDP surprise there. You get better revenue. But I'll take the point that they're going to be in selected sectors some real margin mystery.
Lisa, it's how that revenue falls to the bottom line.
And how much has actually been priced in. I mean, we have seen pockets of real sell-off. I mean, more than 20% among the NASDAQ, a number of big tech players. You just wonder if there's that much more to go if you see a Bed Bath & Beyond type of 20% move.
Lisa, can you go through the schedule for D.C. today? Do we get a vote? Don't we get a vote?
No,
same story yesterday. Today, no vote?
It's going to be basically a lot of phone calls. It's going to be people having a lot of discussions. I wonder what the tenor of those discussions is, though. Is it really, I'll give you this for that? Or is it just, guys, come on. This is potentially catastrophic for our party. And I really wonder how desperate some of those discussions are getting.
I think there's a lot of guys, come on, at the moment, at least, anyway.
So.
Equity futures down a third on the S&P 500, negative a little more than a third of 1%. On the S&P, on the NASDAQ, we're down 0.2%. We turn around just a little bit. In the FX market, euro dollar 115.84, south of 150 on 10s at 148.40. And in crude, Lisa, negative 0.9%, 74.37 on WTI.
We do get a bunch of data today, including spending and personal income. That comes at 8:30 a.m. for the month of August. The expectation is actually for a little bit of a decline in personal income. This, of course, comes on the heels of less fiscal stimulus, the idea of the runoff, the fiscal cliff that a lot of people have been talking about. We're also going to be getting the PCE core deflator index. This is the key gauge of inflation that the Federal Reserve looks at. The expectation is for it to decline just a touch, but still on pace to be well above 3.5% heading into year end, well above the Fed's target. 10 a.m. we get University of Michigan September Consumer Sentiment Survey, just to give you a sense of how much inflation has impacted the way that people feel. This is actually at the lowest going back to 2011, is expected to stay there, and a lot of it has to do with the inflation that we're seeing. We're also going to get the ISM manufacturing print, also a reflection of that. I'm watching, though, the sentiment around buying a car. It has cratered to the lowest ever. There is no inventory. Prices are sky high. People don't want to buy cars, and that is why the expectation is for a year-over-year decline of 25% in car sales and auto sales, which we're expecting to see trickle out throughout the day. John, this really highlights how if you don't have supply, people cannot buy it. It takes a crimp out of GDP. How much is this accounted for? How persistent is this? These are the questions that really go to the heart of the earnings season as well.
Is it profit lost or profit deferred? That's the story, isn't it, for some of these companies?
Absolutely. And a lot of people are saying services side aren't going to come back because you can't recreate that experience. There's only so much time. Goods, however, have been on a tear, and the issue is just all of these supply chain kinks. John, it's a decent question, and it goes straight to the heart of a lot of economic uncertainty.
Earnings season coming up. Lisa, thank you. The S&P 500 down almost 5% last month. But energy equities, Tom, up almost 11 percentage points over the last 30 days. That's one heck of a move.
Come on, the correlation there's the price, and you got to $80 on Brent crude. We pull back to $77.85, John. But again, we have to frame out on supply and on demand, like maybe the global economy will do better than the gloom of 4.8% in China. Thank you, Goldman Sachs. Maybe you get to $100 a barrel. Is that a bad thing, or does that signal a global boom?
Depends what's driving it. Let's get to Sarah Hunt, Alpine Woods Capital Investors Portfolio Manager. Sarah, just how much room for error is there going into earnings season?
I think this is going to be a tough one. I think people are looking exactly what you were talking about earlier. They're looking for margins. They're looking to see what's going on the cost side. Revenue will be important, but really it's how that goes through to the bottom line that people are going to start worrying about, since you're starting to get more information about how those input prices are affecting bottom lines. So I think that's going to be important, and also what people think going forward. To your point, Lisa, about the auto situation, that actually may help 2022 in a way that we weren't expecting earlier in 2021, when we thought that these supply chain issues would be much more easily fixed. So I think to some extent, some of that pullback on the good side may help 2022.
Sarah, a lot of people are saying that this is all going to pass, that supply chain disruptions will ease come next year. Is this because there's anything material being done on repairing some of the fissures that we're seeing in the shipping lines, in the truck driver shortage, or is this because simply we just expect it to sort of ease as people buy less as stimulus wears off?
I think there's an expectation that the supply chains that were crimped by both people being out because of COVID or people being unable to unload things and shortages of labor are going to start to ease. Now, if that doesn't happen and this goes on longer, then you're going to have a bigger problem on the inflation side because this is showing up in inflation at the moment. But I think the expectation is that this will start to get better. And that, again, is going to help 2022 on the good side because you're going to have the ability for that demand to be satisfied where you can't buy a car now. You should be able to in 6 to 12 months to 18 months. That all should start to look out a little bit further. And that may, in fact, boost 2022 when people were worried that all of the snapback was going to come in 2021 after we got vaccines. But that clearly didn't play out this year the way people expected.
Sarah, I look at Anurag Rana and John Butler at Bloomberg Intelligence trying to guesstimate iPhone sales units. And the summary, folks, they have is the street's way wrong. iPhone's selling like cupcakes, and it's up 6.5% over consensus, whatever. But Sarah, do we look at the walls of worry as a market whole, or do you sector specific into a barbell strategy of stocks to avoid, but also stocks that will do well?
Well, I mean, it's impossible to look at everything as a whole because there are different drivers in each different piece of the puzzle. To the extent that some of the reopening stocks did very, very well, like the airlines very early on, you have to still worry about the service sector. You have to still worry about all those areas that are connected to travel and to leisure and to things that people are still somewhat constrained from doing in a very big way. On the other side, where people were expecting that technology would do less well in a reopening trade, I'm not sure that that's true either. I mean, Apple's its own thing because it's a combination of technology and consumer products. But if you look at some of the larger technology stocks that were hurt a little bit in the original reopening trade, I think that there's still room for that group to do fairly well. And that is a group that has more pricing power than some of the other areas. We also look at things like, United Pacific and Dollar General, things on the economy that are that the softer reopening that we got are going to benefit through the next year as well.
There's a difference between companies that have an issue where it's profit lost and then companies that it's just profit deferred. And Sarah, I'm trying to work out just a playbook for this quarter. There'll be names that get hit hard by the story we've been discussing. I want to understand the names I need to buy on the weakness. What's the playbook for that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. We were talking about that internally the other day because I think it's a little bit early on the auto side, but I think that you are going to have some production come back. So I think there's going to be some opportunity in both the autos and the auto suppliers, but I think it's a little early for that. The seasonality of some of the semiconductors on the analog side, like a Texas Instruments or an ADI, I think those are places where if you saw some weakness, those are very good quality companies, and that's an area that we would be looking at if you didn't already have exposure.
Sarah Hunt, thank you. Really important conversation. A couple of weeks away from earnings season, really ramping up officially. Joining us from Alpine Woods Capital Investors, portfolio manager over there. Tom, that note from George Saravelos, just reached out to George over at Deutsche Bank. The title, Gangbusters Ain't Happening, Stagflation Instead. I know you've given this a read. I really struggle with that word at the moment, stagflation. It's the stag piece of it. If you look at the forecast for next year, 4.1% real GDP growth. Tom, does stag equal 4% real GDP growth? I'm not sure it does.
I know we avoid math on Friday, but I'm going to go to Stan Fisher here. And the stagness of this is the percentage move. In defense of Lawrence Summers, it's not so much the number when you plug in inflation or lack of growth. It's the change from where we were, the behavioral shock, John, of having 1 or 2% inflation and all of a sudden having 3.9 or 4.1% inflation in Germany. That's a change, is what Stan Fisher would say.
It's the journey, decelerating growth.
Listen to you.
Decelerating growth.
Oh my God! It's a sensitive
just trying to make it simple,
morning.
Tom. Just trying to make it a little bit more understandable.
Come on.
I thought you were the guy that made it a little bit more understandable. Isn't that what Emma Raducanu said?
Please.
All right, it's the journey. Carry on. I was deeply understanding
this. There are inflation dynamics persisting into next year. It might feel like something really tricky. Stagflation isn't necessarily the destination, in the words of Mohammed El-Erian.
I thought you were going to say somebody, some philosopher. I think Dr. El-Erian and I would agree with me that
he's going to join me a little bit later. That was the tease for.
Well, I don't even know which property he's going to talk to you on. But, it's like the tots. It's a journey.
Okay, can I tell you about this journey? Let me tell you about this journey. From George Saravellos' note, he basically said that basically the way that the backdrop has been is a rotation from reflationary in the first half of the year to definitely stagflationary now. It is the whole idea, talking to the journey, of moving into a time where all of the inflationary inputs slow growth. And I think that that dynamic is stagflation. It's not necessarily stagflation in terms of the headline number, but that dynamic is stagflation.
The journey. This is chapter 2.
Oh, God, you're
I'm
just
working on it.
killing
Just
me.
give me a break, okay? I'm working on
chapter
things.
3.
This is chapter 2.
Tang.
We're down by 9 points on the S&P, recovering just a little bit, negative just 0.2%. Pause, Tom. Just
John.
want to work through this. Yields unchanged, 148.23.
There's nothing going on.
10 cents. Bit of stability out there as we kick off Q4, Tom.
John, in your introduction to Drawdown Meditation, do you really mention journey 3 times?
I talk about the journey multiple
journey.
times. Yeah, life's a journey, Tom.
Oh boy.
Life's a journey.
What are you drinking? Can I have some?
Lisa, it's just simple. Here's the demarcation. Kids, yes. No kids, journey.
It's a journey.
That's
journey.
absolutely nailed
It's not
it.
about what you drink either. Tom usually outside loitering at about
Can I get
4:20
some
smoking
Prosecco?
something. What do you want, Tom? Tobacco?
No, Prosecco.
Oh, Prosecco.
In my
Okay,
tang.
just wanted to be clear on that. Mike Wilson and Morgan Stanley joins us in about 50 minutes' time. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, Lisa, John. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi plans to try again today for a vote on bipartisan infrastructure legislation that's been held up by a battle between moderate and progressive Democrats over President Joe Biden's economic agenda. Lawmakers will pick up where they left off late last night when Pelosi sent them home after hours of negotiations failed to produce an agreement in a setback for Biden. Senator Joe Manchin has set his red line for infrastructure and spending programs. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter reports.
$1.5 trillion rather than the $3.5 trillion that progressives want. Progressives say that is not enough and wish he would stop changing his mind. Manchin says his message is the same.
I'm willing to sit down and work through that 1.5 to get our priorities, and they can come back and do later, and they can run on the rest of it later. I think there's many ways to get to where they want to, just not in everything at one time.
And left in the middle, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden trying to find a path forward within their own party. In San Francisco, I'm Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
President Biden signed a 9-week stopgap funding bill that averts a government shutdown, but fails to resolve the threat of a U.S. default linked to the debt limit. The legislation was hastily passed by both chambers of Congress earlier yesterday. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
This is about honoring our preamble to the Constitution. It talks about establishing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, the general welfare, and the blessings of liberty.
Speaker Pelosi says it keeps funding levels for government departments and agencies until December 3rd. Pharmaceutical company Merck says its experimental COVID-19 pill reduced hospitalizations and deaths by half in people recently infected with the coronavirus. The company said it would soon ask health officials in the U.S. and around the world to authorize its use. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Global News, 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to real-time financial data, market-moving news, powerful analytics, and an influential network of financial decision makers around the world. Share ideas, negotiate trades, and gain the insight you need to make more informed decisions. See how the Terminal can take your workflow to the next level at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Wake up and text. Text and eat. Text and catch the bus. Text and miss your stop. Wait. Text and be late to work.
Sorry, I'm late.
Text and work. Text and pretend to work. Text and act surprised when someone calls you out for not working.
Who, me?
Text and meet up with a friend you haven't seen in forever.
Hi.
Oh, hey.
Text and complain that they're on their phone the whole time. Text and listen to them complain that you're on your phone the whole time. Text and whatever. But when you get behind the wheel, Give your phone to a passenger. Put it in the glove box. Just don't text and drive. Visit StopTextsStopWrecks.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Burden LLP Accountants and Advisors presents Tax Chat with Richard Goldstein, Senior Principal and Co-Leader of Burden State and Local Tax Practice.
The COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting state and local government restrictions have caused businesses to close their doors and many employees to work in locations that were not included in their company's original business footprints. The new normal of remote working has created a variety of state and local tax challenges, from tax nexus and multi-state income tax apportionment to income tax withholding and tax resident status. Businesses and individuals need to stay ahead of these issues to help reduce the impact they may have on their overall tax liability. If you are a high net worth individual or a business owner, let Burden help protect you, your family, and your business.
For more Tax Chat from Burden Accountants and Advisors, visit BurdenLLP.com. That's BERDONLLP.com. Burden Accountants and Advisors. We listen, we solve, we do.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Danny Berger.
Joining us now is Josie Dent, managing economist at the Center for Economics and Business Research. Josie, thanks so much for joining us. So two different signals we're getting here from central bankers saying that T word, it's transitory, versus a market. Manis was pointing to the rise in the 30-year yield, which doesn't seem to believe them. Who's right?
Yeah, of course. Well, looking at the global picture, it remains quite mixed. So while everyone agrees that there are very transitory factors currently pushing up inflation, the impact of base effects from last year, supply shocks that should wash out by next year, they still, well, some central banks are still signaling that they could start to taper asset purchases. So we've got a contrast between the ECB with regard saying that they are not going to make any changes until there's significant evidence that these transitory shocks have passed and actually there's durable rises in inflation. Meanwhile, recent signals from the Fed and the Bank of England in the UK have suggested that despite these transitory factors, they do believe that a tapering of asset purchases might be necessary in the near future. And therefore, I think that spooks markets a bit.
Hear more conversations like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app. Or check your local cable listings.
If to finance those spending and tax decisions, it's necessary to issue additional debt, I believe it's very destructive to put the president and myself, the Treasury Secretary, in a situation where we might be unable to pay the bills that result from those past decisions.
Secretary Yellen there from New York City this morning. Good morning. Tom Keene, Lisa Bramett and Jonathan Ferro. Your equity market softer by just 2 points now. Full recovery on the S&P 500.
NASDAQ 100.
Unchanged on the S&P. The NASDAQ just turning positive, up by 0.04%. Yields unchanged at 148.58. Euro dollar positive at 115.90 as we kick off Q4. Tom Keene, after a really ugly month of September for this market.
Ugly month of September for the government of the United States of America as well. Right now and on radio, this is Spirited. On television, we hope it helps out. Anne-Marie Horton, all applaud in Washington as she and the pandas assist in avoiding shutdown. We need to go to the panda cam operating this morning. The panda cam showing some excitement with an urchin in the background sleeping, and they're walking like I walked to the set. There we go. On radio.
This is real action.
Walking slowly to the set is Tintin, I believe, this morning. Anne-Marie Horton, congratulations on getting the gilt up in Washington over the shutdown of the panda cam. What really happened? Why didn't we shut down?
Well, we avoided a shutdown because they passed the stopgap funding measure. But we should remember this is only till the early December.
December 3, yeah.
Yep, this is going to be a repeat in just a few months to make sure that the government stays open, those federal employees get paid, and the panda cam continues.
The panda cam continues. So what do we do December 3rd? Forget about infrastructure and all the other disaster we've been talking about all morning. Do we just redux this in 45 days, 50 days?
Well, Well, they need a budget, and that's what they're working on in this resolution. This is a framework to a budget in reconciliation. Avoiding a shutdown, there can always be stopgap funding measures to do that. The real drama on Capitol Hill is about whether or not we're going to get that bipartisan infrastructure vote today, like Speaker Pelosi said we would. She promised to vote today when she left the Capitol at midnight. She also promised to vote yesterday, and she also promised to vote on Monday. So it's a precarious situation as they try to work out whether or not you can get the progressives on board for that vote, because they are still holding bipartisan infrastructure, that hard infrastructure plan, hostage until they get some sort of agreement, in the very least, on reconciliation.
Well, talk to us about that then. What does that vote decision depend on, Anne-Marie? We thought Monday, we thought yesterday. What does it depend on now?
Well, progressives have said clearly they will not vote for the hard infrastructure unless there was a vote in the Senate on reconciliation. That seems to be watered down a little bit. There seems to be some openness to at least a framework. And what you had yesterday was a number of meetings going on between the progressives, between the moderates in the House and Speaker Pelosi, but also the White House getting involved. Brian Deese, Susan Rice, all at the Capitol yesterday, shifting between the chambers of Schumer, Pelosi, meeting with Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who now on the Hill is being called Manchinima. There is a lot of negotiations, and really what sets them apart is $2 trillion. That's what they're calling him here, not me.
They call us Keno, and it really works.
It's Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kirsten Sinema, but they're shortening everything here because things are moving fast. But what the crux of it is $2 trillion. And that's the gap they're far apart from when Joe Manchin
Senator Manchin making the point, Anne-Marie, that they should campaign on that in the midterms, that if they want the extra $2 trillion, campaign on it. What was the response to that?
Progressives say they've been campaigning on this for years, and they finally have control of the Senate, control of the House, and control of the White House, the executive branch. So they want action now on this. They don't want to wait to the midterms of next year. And also, another talking point, especially for the progressives, is they want to make sure they can keep their seats next year in the House. Every seat is up. They want to make sure they can go back to their constituents and say, I delivered on childcare, I delivered on climate, I delivered on universal pre-K and the likes.
Well, Anne-Marie, just to sort of sum up, yesterday was also a historic day, not only with respect to the infrastructure spending, but the congressional testimony by Janet Yellen and Fed Chair Jay Powell. Janet Yellen actually took a pretty hard stance. This was a historic comment for her to say she wants to get rid of the debt ceiling, and she was talking about the catastrophic consequences for the U.S. dollar and the preeminency of the U.S. economy should the U.S. default. Is there any backing behind getting rid of the debt ceiling at all? Is this a realistic supposition?
It's not realistic in the short term, right? We're facing that X date of what she outlined as October 18th. Morgan Stanley says maybe it's a little bit later, October 28th. But there is real talk, and there really has been for years, and this is potentially bipartisan. When either party is in control, none of them want to deal with the debt ceiling. So there has been talk of, yes, minting the coin, but obviously this is a long discussion. But also the fact that maybe just give the power to the Treasury to lift the debt ceiling when they come up to these points, when there's a potential default on the U.S. debt.
On the flip side, there's also an increasing politicization of the Federal Reserve. And I think about Joe Manchin, or Manchinima, if you would like to call him that, when it comes to this idea that he would like to see the Federal Reserve taper all of its monthly bond purchases before voting on additional spending. How commonplace is that sort of idea among other members of Senate and Congress?
Haven't heard anyone else talk about this. I'm not even sure you can legislate that, right? The Fed is apolitical. It has nothing to do with what goes on in Congress. Potentially what Senator Manchin meant in that document, which I'm sure you all saw, that memo that was scooped by Politico and which Senator Schumer had signed his name on, was he maybe wanted to see the Fed move towards tapering before they started spending trillions of dollars. But there's no legislation Congress could do to control the Fed.
Emery, nobody cares. I'm watching the Tots Aston Villa. John's watching AC Milan. Lisa's watching, I don't know what Lisa's watching. Panda Cam.
The Yankees won, the Red Sox lost.
Thank you. Do the Yankees need Joey Gallo to play to put it over the top?
Potentially, yeah.
I mean, what do you think? I mean, the Yankees raised this weekend. Come on, this is This is magic.
Yeah, and we're first. We're first for the wild card spot, and I believe the Red Sox are tied with. I'm not sure who it is, but they're tied with someone.
Got nailed.
So we're in we're in very good place. We're in a very good place.
I think it's the Blue Jays.
Good morning, Seattle. We're thrilled to have the Seattle Mariners fans watch us this morning as Horton talks about
Anne-Marie talking about the Yankees when they do well, and
New York Yankees.
You'll never hear from her again when they start to do badly. Anne-Marie, thank you. Anne-Marie Horton, Bloomberg Washington correspondent. Producer Jamie just dropped an email in my inbox. Tom, let me share it with you from Morgan Stanley. Retailers like Walmart, Costco, AutoZone and Dick's Sporting Goods haven't yet seen the worst of the supply chain and freight inflation. At the same time, sales are decelerating. That from Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, okay.
Those warnings are piling up, aren't they? Going into earnings season.
They are, but John, the EBITDA margin on Dick's Sporting Goods is half the big money makers in technology. My problem here is we're coating everything with the same brush.
Yeah, I hear you.
Should we do that?
Clearly we shouldn't. Tom, clearly we shouldn't.
You know, Bed Bath & Beyond, come on. Of course they got hammered.
Well, they got hammered. I mean, you can say, of course, they got hammered, but they were down 20%. Someone didn't expect them to get hammered.
That's not the definition of cratered.
That's not. What is the definition of cratered, Tom? 25?
No, down 2% when the media makes a big deal about it.
Tom, look at that. We're positive. Up 0.1% on the S&P.
Jody Schwartz, noted tax attorney, tells us why she recommends Jewish Communal Fund.
I recommend the JCF to my clients, to my colleagues, to really anyone who asks a question about charitable giving because it's convenient. It allows you the maximum tax deductions permitted by law, and it just makes your life easier, organized, and simple. Another aspect for clients and for other colleagues who don't want their identities to be known or don't want to talk about the property that they're giving away to charity, I found JCF's confidentiality, its aggregate reporting to be very attractive to people.
JCF can help you and your clients organize your charitable giving with a donor-advised fund. A fund can be established with a tax-deductible contribution of $5,000 or more. Contributions to JCF qualify for the highest tax deduction allowed by law. Visit jcfny.org or call 212-752-8277.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, shares how we help you consider everything.
In today's ever-evolving environment, the team at Pershing's Prime Services wants to know, what are you focused on now? Are you confident in the stability of your counterparty? Do you feel they can help you grow your business? When it comes to fundraising, do you have access to the mindset of the advisor or have what you need to navigate the ODD process? Exceptional service for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. Whether it's customized financing or securities lending solutions, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your demands, so you can focus on growing your business and producing results for your clients.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing LLC, member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Futures this morning starting to pair some of their earlier losses. U.S. car makers probably sold about 12.3 million new vehicles in September, down 25% from a year ago. That's according to forecasts. Supply chain headaches triggered by chip shortages have drained inventory, pushing up prices of both new and used cars. The human resources consultant Gartner says 1 in 4 companies has instituted a vaccine mandate for its workers. That's a sharp increase from last month. The big accounting firm PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, introducing a work anywhere policy for its 55,000 U.S. employees, allowing them to choose an all-virtual work option in a bid to keep and attract workers. And Scarlett Johansson and Disney settling their lawsuit over her pay in Black Widow. Their statements suggest no lingering animosity. She claimed the studio's decision to stream the movie cut her compensation. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Your business landscape is ever-changing.
There could be a lot more selling to come.
Ours is too.
Just getting some headlines I want to bring to our audience.
The president's saying that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
We have something else in common.
Those small caps continuing to feel the pressure.
We seek out the latest business news wherever we are.
A deep drop in Asian equities overnight.
Let's bring you some breaking news in terms of earnings.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. For some people, studying the markets is the best part of their day.
What have been the hits and the misses?
When we say some people, we mean these people.
Do they have similar pricing power?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio.
Remind me not to get involved in Major League Baseball banter. I'm told Red Sox are tied with Seattle, Tom, just to be clear.
Yes.
The Mariners, right?
Yeah, it's
not
West
the Toronto
Coast.
Blue
Seattle,
Jays.
Danny Kaye owned them.
They're in the other corner.
Danny Kaye.
I appreciate that, TK. Thank you.
Great
From New York City this morning.
Uniforms.
Good morning. Here's the price action. We're positive now by more than 1/10% as we kick off Q4. We were negative about 0.5%. About an hour ago, actually. Nasdaq futures right now positive 0.2%. The Russell up about 1/10. For the equity market, Lisa Shallitt of Morgan Stanley earlier this week repeated it again to me yesterday. Corporate America has some explaining to do when it comes to margins. Earnings season is going to be fascinating for Q3 as we look ahead to Q4. Switch on the board and get to this one. This is what I want to talk about. Credit Suisse and Andrew Garthwaite with a fantastic note, talking about the only major sector to outperform when inflation expectations rise and PMIs fall. Where is it? It's in energy. And look at this outperformance on energy, TK. 11 percentage points higher over the last month. Tech down 5-6%. We're talking about 15-16 percentage points of performance, just energy relative to tech. Tom, that's a monster move.
I'm wondering what you do on energy, John. Sell side versus what we see from the strategists looking for higher oil prices.
We've got to have that discussion, Tom, through the morning and through the next couple of months, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I agree.
Up 11% on the month. Remarkable move. On the month for Treasuries, up about 18, 20 basis points. Let's round it up and call it 20 for the month of September on Treasury yields.
Yeah.
Basically unchanged this morning at 148.58. 2% on 30s, Tom, still north of that as we set up two really interesting central bank decisions still to come from the Federal Reserve and the ECB. The really interesting meeting for the ECB maybe in December, Tom. For the Federal Reserve, it's early November.
Yeah, well, we're going to see. I mean, we're going to see earnings and see where we are. And John, my problem as we paint Q4 is we're doing it in a huge arc. We're treating everything the same
Couldn't agree
with
more.
a wide set of walls of worry.
I'd throw in this as well, Tom. We've been talking about this story for how long? It's so well talked about, so well known. How well priced is it?
Well, but I think there is a shock to where at least...
Clearly a shock yesterday looking at Bed Bath & Beyond.
John, do you agree that a 4.1% inflation statistic in Germany, I'm sorry, I think that's a shock.
It gets your attention.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a shock. It gets your attention. Does it change policy at the ECB?
No.
I'm not
Not
so
a
sure.
chance.
I'm not so sure. And that's what matters right now. The reaction function of the ECB versus, say, the Federal Reserve, and how you push that through the FX market for the year still to come. That dollar strength story persists. Your yield this morning, then, about 149, just south of 150. That's the cross-asset price action. Let's get you some movers and say good morning to Romain Bostic. Morning, Romain.
Hey, good morning, John. Taking a look at some of the individual movers out there. Let's start off here with Merck. The share's higher here in the pre-market by about 7%. It's, of course, been working on a pill, an antibody pill here to treat COVID-19 patients. It had been in a late-stage trial. It's now saying that that pill actually reduces hospitalizations and deaths by about 50%. It is halting that trial and now seeking immediate emergency authorization. This would be a big deal. It effectively allows people with mild cases of COVID-19 to treat themselves at home, presumably for a lot less cost than what they would have to do if they had to go into the hospital. Micron shares slightly higher here on the day. There was some interesting commentary by the CEO about some of the supply chain issues, saying that they will continue to persist into next year, though they are doing what they can here to try to work with some of its customers in order to get that under control. And Lordstown Motors, remember, this is the big EV maker, still trying to come to market with its vehicle. It bought a big GM plant all the way back in 2019. It's flipping that plant back onto the market to Foxconn. It bought it for 20. It's going to sell it for 230. It invested a lot of money into it, so this really isn't necessarily a cash positive deal for it, but it gets an investment out of Foxconn with it, and it lets it diversify some of the risk of manufacturing these EVs. This is a big deal for Lordstown, even bigger deal for Foxconn. And of course, because Foxconn's involved, there's a lot of speculation now about Apple and its ambitions with regards to a car. Flip up the board, a couple of other movers to keep an eye on. This in the M&A space. Zoom and Five9, they were supposed to combine. They announced this deal back in July. Immediately met a lot of resistance from regulators because of concerns about ties to China here, whether those were justified or not. That was going to kill the deal. Instead, what killed the deal was a drop, actually, in Zoom's share price, down about 26% since that deal was announced.
Romain, what is Five9? Are they like a mini Zoom?
It's like a call center, but, you know, Modern, Tom, software.
Modern.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was
Like
supposed to
my
combine
rotary
that, and you know, it was going to be a big company, Tom. But no, shareholders in 5/9 basically rejected it. But again, this is largely because, look, this was an all-stock transaction, and the stock down 26% since the deal was announced.
What about DraftKings?
DraftKings, well, this is the other thing to keep an eye on here. There are a ton of pending deals out there, all-stock deals, and now a lot of people are concerned that given the drawdown that we've seen in the market here, some of these deals could be under pressure. DraftKings has 2 deals outstanding. They're cash and stock deals combined. But again, you're talking about a huge, significant drop here in a lot of these shares. We talk about the quarter that just ended. Keep in mind, Tom, you had something like 70% of the members in the Russell 1000 were in the red in this most recent quarter. You got $597 billion worth of stock-related deals right now pending out there. It'll be interesting to see if others are affected by this.
Romaine Bostick, the close as we open the fourth quarter of this 2021. Jane Foley is known for writing British paragraphs. They're longer than American paragraphs, but she writes exceptionally terse, brilliant notes on the ebbs and flows of foreign exchange. She's with Rabobank, one of the great commercial banks of Europe. She really has to worry about business transactions, investment, and speculation. She joins us this morning, their senior foreign exchange strategist. Jane, I love your quantification of speculation in the Australian dollar. What is the speculation entering Q4 in US dollar, in yen, in euro?
Well, I think it's really all one way, and we've seen this pushing back into the US dollar. And to be honest, I think we've got to include emerging markets really into your question there, because what we often see in the dollar, what we always see in the dollar in recent years, is that when risk appetite is low and people don't want to invest in emerging markets, the dollar does well. And if we look right now on the headwinds to emerging markets, well, we've got energy price increases. We've got the Fed potentially hiking interest rates in 2022, and we've got that slowdown in China.
Right.
And all of these are going to be and have been pushing money back into the US dollar.
Can there be a big figure move in Indonesia, in Poland, in Turkey?
Well, you know, again, all of these are going to be vulnerable in this sort of environment. I mean, energy prices tend to have a bigger impact, and the huge quantity that we've seen in wholesale gas prices, for instance, in Europe, really will have an impact. Now, there's different parameters here. We've got to look at which ones are energy exporters. Those ones will do well in the same way that you were describing that energy firms are the only ones to do well in this sort of environment as well. So the energy exporters will do well, and the Aussie will have a little bit of relief on that front, as will some of those EM countries too. But generally speaking, energy prices are a big drag on real incomes. You know, it is something which is really going to make people poorer and affect demand, not necessarily the sort of inflation that most central banks will respond to.
Well, okay, so this is the interesting conundrum we hear from a number of analysts who come on this show. It's not necessarily something that central bankers respond to. However, the ECB's hand might be really called as a result of some of the inflationary pressures that we're seeing, not only from energy, but also supply chain disruptions, and the fact that increased ability to buy will only exacerbate this. At what point do you see this pressuring the euro stronger and the dollar weaker, given the fact that at some point the higher inflation prints will have an impact on central bank policy?
I don't think that we're talking about higher rates than the ECB really for some time. I think this is a story really affecting the dollar and a few other central banks. Norway obviously have moved already. There's a couple of others in the frame, but not the ECB. I mean, again, if we look at the headwinds, and we look at yesterday's German unemployment data, it improved, but not at the sort of rate that people were expecting. If we look at Germany's exports, they're very tied to China, and we know that China is slowing. We know that we've seen part of China's industrial district having shutdowns because of electricity shortages, for instance. So I think Germany is facing the sort of headwinds. We do have an inelastic demand for energy, or relatively inelastic, and it's very difficult to shift that in the short term. So higher energy prices really does respond to lower demand, and that actually could pull the economies into a weaker position, and that could be a concern for central banks into the new year.
So, Jane, what we have to talk about, just to explore, is what happens to a developed market currency when a central bank needs to hike into economic weakness. How does that currency respond? And is sterling a decent example of that at the moment?
Oh, sterling really is a decent example of that. We've seen hawkish commentary from the central bank not coming through into gains for that currency. Now, this could be because the UK does have a significant current account deficit. That could be increasing the vulnerability, because as international investors look in, they want to see the whole suite of fundamentals. And what they're seeing in the UK now are really nasty numbers of fuel price shortages, driver shortages, skills shortages. And the whole suite of these concerns is weighing, it appears, on investment expectations. We've seen that in the survey this morning from the UK's Institute of Directors, and that is really bogging down sterling right now.
Jane, great to catch up. With G10FX finally waking up a little bit. Jane Foley, it's been too long. Thank you. Rubber Bank Senior FX Strategist. Cable back through 135. Sterling at 135.40 against the US dollar. Positive this morning, Tom, by about 0.5%.
Yeah, one of the great charts I have, John, off the Bloomberg is trade-weighted sterling. And we forget that through Brexit, once, twice, three times, we went down and revisited John Major weakness in trade-weighted sterling. We've had a nice advance, not meaningful, but a nice lift in sterling. And now what, John? Do we go back down and revisit?
No idea.
John
What we're
Major
exploring
levels?
now is something really important. What happens with a developed market currency when it becomes disconnected from interest rates because a central bank has to hike into economic weakness because of price pressure. I'm not saying that is my base case. I don't have one going into next year. I've got no idea what next year looks like. That's my view on next year.
John,
huge range of outcomes, Tom.
John,
but that's the situation we have to explore in G10FX right now.
You asked yesterday to somebody, is the UK the new EM currency? Do you really believe that?
That was a question. That question does not imply that is my strongly held belief,
it was
Tom.
couched with all of this.
Did you get that idea from Lisa?
Caveats around
Exactly.
it.
There were all these things saying, don't send me hate mail.
I've still got friends in the City of London. I know what happens when you start to ask that question. I just can't be bothered with it. It's almost the weekend.
That's the real issue.
And now Tom's trying to stir it up. Euro dollar 116. Futures up a third of 1%.
Frontier economy.
From New York City.
Mayfair is a frontier economy.
This is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, Lisa, John, there's a potential new weapon in the fight against COVID. Pharmaceutical company Merck released new data today about their antiviral drug, which reduced the risk of hospitalization or death by up to 50% in clinical trials. Merck CEO Robert Davis called it a game changer.
We couldn't be more excited about the news we're putting out today and the fact that we have really this wonderful new antiviral product. This is the first oral antiviral that will be available to combat COVID-19.
Merck's CEO Robert Davis spoke to ABC. Australia is set to restart international travel in the coming weeks. The country's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, says it's time to give Australians their lives back. Morrison says that restrictions will be lifted once the country reaches 80% double-dose vaccination targets.
We've saved lives, we've saved livelihoods, but we must work together to ensure that Australians can reclaim the lives that they once had in this country.
Prime Minister Morrison made the announcement in Canberra today. Despite a long night of negotiations, Democrats remain unable to reach an immediate deal to salvage President Joe Biden's $3.5 trillion government overhaul, forcing leaders to call off promised votes on a related public works bill. Speaker Nancy Pelosi had pushed the House into an evening session as the Democratic leaders worked to negotiate a scaled-back plan centrist holdouts would accept. Action will resume today. Today is the 4th anniversary of the Las Vegas mass shooting. The names of the 58 people who died on October 1st, 2017 will be read just after 10 p.m. Vegas time at a downtown community healing garden. At least 2 other victims who died later will also be remembered. The massacre that became the deadliest mass shooting in modern history changed lives of the families. Officials in Hawaii are urging caution as visitors flock to the Big Island to witness the Kilauea volcano eruption that began Wednesday. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Global News, 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. With the Bloomberg.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to real-time financial data, market-moving news, powerful analytics and an influential network of financial decision makers around the world. Share ideas, negotiate trades, and gain the insight you need to make more informed decisions. See how the terminal can take your workflow to the next level at Bloomberg.com/professional.
Business of Sports Report. I'm Michael Barr. An NBA legend is speaking out about COVID vaccines. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar agrees with the NBA after the league warned unvaccinated players they will not be paid for games they miss because they are violating local executive orders for shots. He says black athletes can do a lot to change the template.
It's like an extension of Black Lives Matter. Most of the people who are dying are black people. Most of the people who are losing their jobs and being negatively affected in other ways economically are black Americans.
Jabbar also says the unvaccinated in the NBA are missing an opportunity not only to protect themselves, but others as well.
I thought it was very irresponsible. It sounded to me like they have not made any attempt to inform themselves on what's going on.
And that is a Bloomberg Business of Sports Report. I'm Michael Barr, brought to you by Exergen.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
Business, finance, and the latest news affecting world markets. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
The United States is inching closer to yet another dark milestone as October begins. Nearly 700,000 people have lost their battle with coronavirus. About half of those deaths happened in just the past 9 months due to the surging Delta variant. The House is scrambling to bring a plan to fix the nation's roads and bridges up for a vote, which House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said will happen soon. Leanne Caldwell is covering the behind-the-scenes drama on Capitol Hill.
When she was leaving the Capitol at 12:30 a.m., she said there will be a vote today. What she means by that, she did not close the floor, so the legislative day continues.
Yesterday's planned vote on the bipartisan infrastructure bill was delayed after negotiations over a separate and much larger spending bill stalled last night. Get ready to see a whole lot of pink. Today marks the start of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Experts say nearly 13% of women will be diagnosed with breast cancer at some point. They recommend early screening, which can increase the survival rate. I'm Michael Kastner.
It's the closest thing you can find to a masterclass on how the world works.
The United States has lost a tad of credibility.
Bloomberg Balance of Power.
Are we fulfilling those commitments at this point?
Weekdays at noon Eastern.
Can you give us the priorities?
On Bloomberg Radio.
I think investors have gotten accustomed to management teams that are saying we can manage inflationary pressures, we can manage supply chain issues. You're starting to see some hints that it's not a manageable issue for some companies anymore. And I think investors are trying to sort out, is this a broader issue for the equity market, or is this just specific companies that are starting to stumble?
Lori Calvasina, the wonderful Lori Calvasina of RBC Capital Markets, the head of equity strategy there on the issue in the back end of this year. From New York City this morning, good morning. Tom Keene, Lisa Bramis and Jonathan Ferro. As we kick off Q4, it's a round trip in this equity market, deeply negative to positive. Positive 19 from negative 19. We're now positive 0.4% on the S&P. You might have done, Tom. Maybe. Yields unchanged too, up maybe about a half a basis point to 149.27. Euro dollar, slightly stronger euro, just hanging out in and around by a 116 handle at 115.97. Just take a look at the intraday move we've had over in Europe. The Stock 600 was down by almost 1.6% there and thereabouts. Now negative just 0%. 0.16%. The team at Bloomberg doing a great job of getting a load of notes together at the moment, Tom. A lot of publishing happening this morning on the south side. Bank of America turning negative on European equities, seeing the stock 600 down 10%.
Well,
they cut European equities to negative from neutral. The bank's equity strategist saying the macro backdrop is now shifting from a Goldilocks to an anti-Goldilocks scenario. That's been the discussion all this morning. And Tom, I keep saying this, those notes are piling up. This feels like a bit of capitulation here. Up to you what you want to do with that. It's just what it feels like this morning.
They're relaunching for the fourth quarter, and we'll see where they all stand the third week in November. I believe one house is coming out with a frozen note that's very anti-Elsa as well. We're looking for that later today.
I'm excited for that, Tom.
I am
Thanks.
too. Thank you. Ira Jersey with us right now. They're Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Interest Rate Strategist and Weekend Football Prognosticator. We're going to do rates first, Ira, and then we'll talk football. Ira, what do you glean from the spread market in which spread matters?
Well, I'm right now looking at the 5-year versus the 30-year curve, because the 5-year is going to give us a lot of hints as to the path and pace and timing a little bit of when the Federal Reserve is going to start hiking, because they will probably hike at some point, but still a lot of uncertainty about exactly when and how fast. So I think right now the 5-year to 10-year sector has been underperforming along the curve. Meanwhile, that 30-year sector still shows that there's a lot of demand for duration. There's still a global hunt for yield, and the U.S. among the more liquid, deeper government bond markets is still the high yielder. So there's still a lot of people, buying that 30-year bond.
Ira, let's take a step back. We're on Journey Friday, where we discuss the big picture, and I do want to know what the consequence is of what could be the worst year for global bonds going back to at least 1999. This is according to a Bloomberg index. I'm wondering whether this is actually the best news possible, because it has been a bond sell-off that has been completely unremarkable, undramatic, and not shaking some sort of fundamental optimism about a longer-term outlook. Do you agree?
Well, I do think that the market is I don't know how optimistic it exactly is. It's saying that disaster is not going to be maintained, right? So when you think about how this year has developed, you had that big sell-off in January and February with when yields were, went from about 60 basis points all the way up to 1.75% on the 10-year yield, and then we retraced about half of that. So I think that we're trying to find a new equilibrium right now based on the paradigm of uneven but okay growth, a Federal Reserve that's going to and seems to be sticking with their new framework. So therefore, they might not hike until a little bit longer maybe than the market's currently pricing, but one that is going to taper, because Lisa, you've been tweeting about this on and off for the last couple of months, and that $1.6 trillion in the Fed's reverse repo facility just shows that all of this cash that the Fed's printing by doing QE is just getting recycled right back to the cash, right back to the Fed, because the economy just doesn't need all that money.
Okay.
So I do think that the equilibrium we're finding now is probably some kind of range where we might be able to stay in for more or less the rest of the year.
Okay, so when we talk about how every dip is buyable in equities, it has been even more so in bonds over the past few decades. And I'm wondering whether this dip is buyable. If it's not, as you've said, you expect yields to go up. Why is this time different?
Well, I don't know that it is different, but when you think about that long-term, 40-year downtrend in yields, there's still cycles that occur within it. So some of our research is actually focused on that. So when you think about cycle instead of trend, you're right, Lisa. Like every single dip has been buyable, but some of those dips have taken almost 2 years to develop, and they wind up with 10-year yields getting about 2% above the trend. So we're not there yet. We're not there until we get to about 2.5%. So we still have a significant potential sell-off to go to where we typically get within the interest rate cycle.
Ira, I know you hang on our every word, but the fact is, because of John Farrow, we're studying the journey of Q4 and into 2022. And Ira Jersey, one of the great journeys going on right now is Matty Cash for Aston Villa. I mean, this kid has come up and gotten it done. How big a threat is he to the Tots this weekend?
Well, so he has a pretty mean cross, and playing there at the outside back with with the other Matt Target on the other side. You know, those two guys I think are underappreciated stars for Aston Villa, and you know we had they've been playing very consistently, right? So I think that's one of the big things for soccer players is just how consistent can they be, as opposed to necessarily how great or spectacular they can be.
Oh, that would be the tots you're discussing, John. These guys are like 19 years old.
They are. Villa is above Spurs in the league, Tom.
Above?
To put that out
Who
there.
isn't?
Yeah.
And above Arsenal,
Doing okay. Ira, thank you. When I first joined this programme, I never thought we'd get to this point, Tom, where you'd be bringing up the football and you'd be doing this so well.
Wait. I didn't bring it up. Mervyn King just emailed in and told me to ask that question.
What did Governor King say?
Governor King said, Tom, you got to bring up Matty Cash with Ira Jersey.
Big Villa fan.
Yeah.
Massive Villa fan. I was at a game with him once.
Yeah. He says they're not going to raise rates.
They're not going to raise rates where, Tom? Do you want to clear that up just in case someone believes you?
We better clear that up,
you
folks.
Might want to.
It's our journey
You're
of
making something up. Okay, all right. Just to be very specific and clear about that. Ira, thank you, sir.
Although I did speak to Chair Yellen on the shutdown.
I don't think you want to even pretend that you've done that. Mike Wilson's going to join us a little bit later from Morgan Stanley, the chief US equity strategist. Looking forward to that conversation.
Is he even gloomier?
He's looking for a 10% move, Tom, base case. And he's been leaning towards something bigger.
Come on, when do we
get to the lean? We'll get to the lean in just a moment.
Everybody on the street, John, sounds like Lisa Abramowitz.
Those calls are starting to pile up this morning.
Yes.
Lisa, I've seen note after note after note, and I said a little bit earlier, maybe 5 minutes ago, starting to feel like a bit of Southside capitulation going into earnings now.
They've joined my journey. Look, the thing is that you've already seen so much of a drawdown in specific stocks. And what is being priced in, and you keep pointing, John, and rightly so, to Bed Bath & Beyond. If it's priced in, then what explains a more than 20% move in a company that, as Tom was saying, seems like they're in the crosshairs of all of this supply chain issues?
Likewise with Nike the other week. BTIG, analysts called it several weeks before that. Many others did too. Wasn't until the numbers dropped that the stock actually reacted to it, though. Mike Wilson coming up. He's a man to listen to on what's happening here. Your equity market turning around this Friday morning. Futures positive 1/3%. The S&P up around about 13 points. Yields unchanged, 148.75. Tom Keane, Lisa Brabbitts and Jonathan Ferro, heard on radio, seen on TV. This is Bloomberg.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President and Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at seic.com/seize change.
NJIT makes innovation happen. It also makes entrepreneurs like Anya O'Dwyer. Founder of Innovate, a tech-driven civil engineering and construction management firm, Anya says NJIT is defining the future.
NJIT is extremely important as a hub of disciplines all in one space with all of these brilliant minds. NJIT's role is huge when it comes to defining the future and how, from an interdisciplinary point of view, they have it all there, whether it's the innovation hub, the maker's space. NJIT is already creating that collaboration between the disciplines, and you have civil engineers speaking to programmers, speaking to electrical engineers, and together they're creating advancements that we wouldn't have been able to do without those three minds coming together and solving a problem as one rather than solving it in isolation.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Futures this morning starting to pair some of their earlier losses.
U.S. car makers probably sold about 12.3 million new vehicles in September, down 25% from a year ago. That's according to forecasts. Supply chain headaches triggered by chip shortages have drained inventory, pushing up prices of both new and used cars. The human resources consultant Gartner says 1 in 4 companies has instituted a vaccine mandate for its workers. That's a sharp increase from last month. The big accounting firm PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, introducing a work anywhere policy for its 55,000 U.S. employees, allowing them to choose an all-virtual work option in a bid to keep and attract workers. And Scarlett Johansson and Disney settling their lawsuit over her pay in Black Widow. Their statement suggests no lingering animosity. She claimed the studio's decision to stream the movie cut her compensation. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
When Paul Sweeney and Matt Miller bring you the day's market news.
How do you think investors should view Bitcoin?
You can count on some frivolity.
We've never taken them to Disney, so just failure on so many different fronts.
Bloomberg Markets. Extensive, essential, and endlessly entertaining.
I'm not a pet person. I'm a financial analyst. By the way, someone writes in and says, I didn't realize Paul hated American values.
Weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Markets. You can't predict them.
The Delta variant is ripping up the playbook.
Investors being in a bit of a fog at the moment.
But when you listen to us, you'll come pretty close.
Let's take a look at those small cap stocks.
We're taking a look at some of the sector winners, the sector losers.
Is this bullish or is it bearish?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Broadcasting 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
Goods demand in the economy has pulled forward growth by several years.
The demand is there. The indications are that we're seeing this re-engagement in the economy start.
Look at those consumer inflation expectations. They're not falling, they're rising.
Even though input cost supply issues are a problem, because of higher CPI, you can actually pass those on to the consumer.
The expectation is that this will start to get better, and that again is going to help 2022.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Farrow, and Lisa Abramowitz.
Good morning, everyone. Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Tom Keene. It is a new quarter coming up, a conversation to get you started on the next 90 days, and indeed a conversation on 2025. Mike Wilson to join us here in moments. And John Farrow, like much of the street, the Wilson journey is afeared.
People are joining that Wilson journey, that's for sure, Tom. We heard from Deutsche Bank a little bit earlier this morning. Upside risk to inflation, downside risk to growth. Bank of America in the last hour downgrading European equities. The why? We go from Goldilocks to anti-Goldilocks. My point, Tom, these issues are so well talked about. They are so well known. Why aren't they well priced at this point going into Q4?
That's the behavior of the market always, John. What I would suggest is we've had a preponderance of bull markets set in the last number of days, and Mike Wilson has a different story.
Mike Wilson has a base case of a move of 10% lower, Tom, 10% lower. Are we starting to lean towards that tail risk that it becomes 20? Is he gaining some confidence? Is that confidence building that it could be something worse than 10%, Tom, based on what we've seen through price alone over the last week?
Let's say there are 14 things on the journey of the market into 2022. And Lisa, of those 14, 4, 5, 6 are wrapped around Washington with great uncertainty overnight.
Yeah, look, the journey of worry is getting a lot more entrenched. The idea here of could we not possibly get any plan, let alone the $550 billion bipartisan bill passed, but certainly not the other component as gridlock ensues. This had been a potential tailwind to help keep spending going at a time when people are getting concerned about the inflationary pressures. That is really eating into consumer sentiment, which we're going to be finding out more about at 10 a.m.
Let's get to the data quickly here so we get to Mike Wilson. John, I'm going to notice your journey this morning started with red on the screen. That's changed.
It's turned around. We're positive now, up 16 on the S&P, advancing 0.4% after the smallest of quarterly gains. The monthly loss, though, is the one that haunts people coming into Q4. The biggest monthly loss since March of 2020. We're down 5% from the highs on the S&P. We're down 6% from the highs, Tom, on the NASDAQ.
Yeah, you're seeing fixed income too, John. Give me some love here off of what Ira Jersey said. He's looking the 530 spread, just the nominal 10-year, 1.49%.
148.75 on 10s, and let's get to 5s just quickly, Tom. Your 5-year yield this morning, just south of 1%, at about 96, 97 basis points. That's where the conversation is going to be going into a new year. Can this Federal Reserve hike and how many hikes can they deliver over the next several years?
The real yield a negative 0.89%. That has been a greater negative number over the last couple of days. We believe Mike Wilson will not be on the real yield this afternoon at 1 p.m. with John Farrell.
Thanks
Look
for that, Tom.
Through the weekend.
The
Joining us now, Mike Wilson of Morgan Stanley, their chief U.S. equity strategist. Mike, I want to go 60,000 feet on you. We have had a stretch of disinflation from Volcker to Mike Wilson right now. Do you sense that this is a nuance within a bull market wrapped around fixed income, commodities, the rest of it, the dollar, etc., or are we at a point of a major change in the vectors to 2025?
Well, look, I mean, we've had that view for a while. We felt like last year's pandemic was the catalyst to kind of move us out of this disinflationary, deflationary world we've been in for 20 years, quite frankly. A lot of other things, were happening before the pandemic, deglobalization, some of the populist movement, which was talking about, inequality of wealth and income, and that train had already left the station. So the pandemic, which, by the way, pandemics are typically inflationary. So that was a perfect foil to get the transition from monetary policy dominance to fiscal policy dominance, and it's begun. And normally it happens with what I call a kickoff move, Tom. When you see big trends change, you get a big kickoff move, and that's what we've seen in all the inflation indicators. My best guess is it'll settle down, but then the trend is changing. And so it's going to be a long journey ahead. It took us 35 years to get here. It's going to take us 35 years probably to get to the peak in rates. It's going to be a slow-moving train. And, essentially what I'm saying is buy the dips on inflation.
Mike, the equity market, you're looking for a 10% move lower on the S&P 500. We've had 5 percentage points of it. Are you seeing, with increasing confidence, it could be worse than that? It could drift towards that other level you were looking for, a 20% move. If you are, why?
Yeah, John, I mean, last time we chatted about this was kind of after we made that lean. It was prior to the situation in China with the property development company. And, look, I think what happened here is, we've got more data on the idea that not only are we getting a tightening of financial conditions from the Fed, lower multiples, but we're also getting a greater slowdown than perhaps is expected now. We're seeing in the earnings numbers. You guys have been talking about the cost pressures, the supply issues and constraints, but there's also this payback in demand thesis that we've had for quite a while. Our cost thesis is playing out now. People are aware of it, but I don't think they really appreciate how much payback and demand there's going to be in these areas that we overconsumed. Okay, so the bottom line for us is that risk has increased. And it's not our base case yet, but clearly moving that way.
Mike, touch on this. You've touched on it briefly. Build on it for us. What we've seen over the last several months has been so well flagged. It's talked about so much, so well known, and yet clearly from your perspective, poorly priced. Mike, why is that?
Well, it's not poorly priced at the stock and sector level, right? I mean, we've talked about this too, John. I mean, it's been basically a rolling correction since March. That's when we made the mid-cycle transition call. The market has moved aggressively towards high quality, large cap, high quality in particular. And what the market is saying is that we're taking shelter. The market, it's got to own something, right? And what happens is people move to, the highest parts of the land away from the flood. And that's where the high quality stocks are. Typically, when you get to the point, the moment of truth, which is now, which is where the earnings start to get cut, and where the Fed actually, moved to tighten, then even the high shelter areas are no longer protected. And that's how the mid-cycle transition ends. So, I mean, the script is really playing out to a T. It's hard to trade. There's a lot of cross currents, but generally speaking, we're right on schedule, and it should finish up in the fourth quarter.
As you said, the rolling correction since March has left a lot of big stocks, like big tech stocks, down substantially. If we get a full 20% correction here, what will be the drivers of that, given how significant the correction's already been in some of the major components of the indexes?
Well, Lisa, but I mean, quite frankly, those stocks benefited tremendously from March until recently. So they had a huge move up, and that's what's held the averages up. So now they're going to have their, comeuppance, and they may not even go back to where they were in March, and that would be a big drop. But they're going to have to go down if the major indices are going to have this 10 to 20% correction, and that should happen anyways, because, quite frankly, those stocks are most vulnerable to a tightening of financial conditions. And not all of them, but I think several of those companies are also vulnerable to this payback in demand. from the overconsumption during the work from home period.
So what's the driver then? Is it going to be just a direct yield correlation story that basically as yields go up, the big tech stocks sell off, or is there going to be an earnings component as well?
Yeah, I think it's both. I mean, that's the fire and ice, scenario, right? The fire is basically you get a tightening financial conditions, multiples come down, and then you get a little bit of ice on the back end of that. The deceleration that you always get at this stage of the economic cycle is normal. Now, normally what happens is, earnings continue to go up, but because the amplitude of this, recession recovery were so dramatic, you have to assume that the mid-cycle transition deceleration will be more or larger than average, okay? I mean, to think otherwise would just be intellectually dishonest.
Mike, are we finally at a point where we've been so wrong about single-digit actuarial assumption, 10-year SPX, 15.7% per year? Can you tell your team at Morgan Stanley the single-digit equity return world is finally upon us?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's interesting, Tom. I think you understand this, but it's easier to predict stock returns over a 7-year period than it is over a 1-year period. Why is that? Because over 7 years, the value, your starting valuation comes to fruition. Okay, you can't avoid that. Your returns, your actual returns over a 7-year period are contingent upon the price you pay. And we all know assets are expensive right now, whether you're talking about bonds, which are being financially repressed, or stocks, or any asset that's tied to the 10-year Treasury yield, which is artificially low. So, yeah, I mean, the starting point is poor on a 7-year basis. And so it's high conviction, and this is not a big call, by the way, high conviction. It's a single-digit return outlook, okay? Not the end of the world, but I mean, that's what financial repression is. I mean, that's the world we're in, lower returns. It's not the end of the world, but, that's a fact.
Mike, great to catch up as always. Got to work through this together through Q4 and work out when to buy this market. Mike Wilson there of Morgan Stanley, Chief US Equity Strategist and CIO. As we kick off Q4, Tom, looking for a 10 percentage point correction. We've had about half of it so far on the S&P.
When we invented this, folks, this is what it's about, John. When we got on the journey of Bloomberg surveillance.
This is the journey, all right, Tom.
It's about guests with really intelligent, really thought out, differing opinions. And you've heard it this week on the equity market.
That rolling correction through this equity market, Lisa, that started with the small caps back in March.
I think that's the most interesting aspect, that basically which aspects of the rolling correction can continue. The fact that Mike Wilson was talking about big tech having a lot more a sell-off to be because of the fire and ice component, the higher interest rates in addition to potentially cooling profits, is a fascinating outlook. I wonder at what point people get nervous, though. If you start to see your big components really tank.
John, it's called the Game of Thrones strategy.
Is that right?
That's what the fire and ice strategy
Lisa's
is.
journey.
Did you notice that on Lisa's journey, how the street is joining Lisa's journey?
Yeah, the street is joining Lisa's journey.
They're joining
I don't think it's a journey they want to be on, to be honest with you.
I mean, I don't think John Gollum's on the journey.
Lisa. I love Lisa.
Ben Laidler's not on a journey.
It's not a train I want to stay on for too long.
It's true. I don't either.
Lisa's
the misery. The misery of that journey.
I'm going to go have some tang and it'll all be fine.
You do that. Make sure it's spiked. Lisa Brown was
it is on a Friday.
Oh, I know it is, Tom. Monday to Friday.
They keep getting the percentile
getting it right, are
where
they?
Francine grew up is really good.
Equity futures up 1/3 of 1%. This is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, Lisa, John, it could give doctors another tool in fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. Merck's COVID-19 antiviral pill reduced the risk of hospitalization or death by 50% in an interim analysis of a late-stage trial, according to the company. Merck CEO Robert Davis called it a game changer.
This drug, this antiviral molnupiravir, basically is able to, if taken within 5 days of the onset of symptoms, significantly reduce the risk that a patient is either going to have to ultimately go into the hospital and, most importantly, reduces significantly the risk of death.
Merck's CEO Robert Davis spoke to ABC. New York City public school employees are asking the U.S. Supreme Court to halt the city's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, which will be enforced starting today. The workers said in their emergency request to justices, thousands of public school employees will be forced out of work. They note that while other municipal employees are allowed to opt out of the vaccine requirement by agreeing to weekly COVID testing, that option is not available to public school staff. North Korea today says it had test-fired a newly developed anti-aircraft missile in the third of weapons firings this month. It comes as Pyongyang pushes to reopen stalled talks with rival South Korea. North Korea expert Gordon Chang says there are reasons behind these tests.
We know the North Koreans want to create some provocations because they would like sanctions relief. And they think if they make enough noise that other countries will start to talk to them to see what can be done.
Gordon Chang is the author of Nuclear Showdown, North Korea Takes on the World. Despite a long night of frantic negotiations in Congress, Democrats remain unable to reach an immediate deal to salvage President Joe Biden's government overhaul. Action resumes today. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Global News 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Bloomberg.com/professional.
Burden LLP Accountants and Advisors presents Tax Chat with Lisa Goldman, partner and leader of Burden's International Tax and Advisory Practice.
If you're a high net worth individual with international investments or a business owner with operations overseas, it is essential to have a tax advisor who knows how to protect your assets on a global scale. Owning and investing in foreign corporations comes with certain tax responsibilities. Burden Accountants and Advisors works with clients to ensure that they understand the intricacies of the global market, maximize the tax opportunities available, and reduce the challenges presented by international tax laws.
If you're a high net worth individual or a business owner, let Burden help protect you, your family, and your business. For more tax chat from Burden Accountants and Advisors, visit burdenllp.com. That's BERDONLLP.com. Burden Accountants and Advisors. We listen, we solve, we do.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Influential conversations from Bloomberg Television. Here's Tom McKenzie.
Let's turn to fintech then, and the UK's second most valuable startup is expanding its presence in London. Checkout.com is on a hiring push as it scales up. That's after its most recent round of fundraising tripled the payment firm's valuation to $15 billion US. Joining us now is Guillaume Pouzat, the Checkout.com CEO. Good morning, Guillaume. Thank you for joining us. You're bulking up your C-suite team. Is this you gearing up for an IPO?
Good morning. Thank you for having me. So, no, we're actually just trying to build the best business possible. I think it's like you've highlighted, the business is growing tremendously, exponentially. We've tripled the volume this year again. And we hire about 100 people a month at this point. And when you build a big business, you want to make sure that your bench and your management team is just very strong.
How much more fundraising, Guillaume, do you need?
I think right now it's documented that we've been profitable for nearly the last 6 or 7 years. So the company is profitable. The unit economics are very good. The business is growing really fast. What we're trying to focus is the size of the opportunity that is in front of us, which we believe we're still scratching the surface of. We have 19 offices. E-commerce is still growing at massive double digits. So fundamentally, that's what we're focusing on right now.
Hear more conversations like this one on Bloomberg Television, streaming live on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg mobile app. Or check your local cable listings.
You have acted to make our banking system less safe, and that makes you a dangerous man to head up the Fed.
Chairman Powell, your decisive action
help prevent the worst of the economic impacts of COVID. You were thoughtful, deliberate, and transparent. The antithesis, I would say, of dangerous. Our country will be better off with your continued leadership at the Federal Reserve.
Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and Representative Patrick McHenry there of North Carolina. A dangerous man. The quote of the week, Tom Keene, down on Capitol Hill from New York City this morning.
I must admit that is true.
Good morning. Tom Keene, Lisa Bramett and Jonathan Ferro. Equities turning around. We were down 19. We were down 20. We're now positive 19, 20 points, up by 0.5%. Yield shaping up as follows, up almost a basis point, pushing 150 again, just south of that level at 149.44. Tom Keene, as we enter a dangerous period down in Washington, D.C.
Okay, we're in search of information, and we're going to see it with the economic data, John. And, I mean, we're just going to get more information in, wrapped around what the relative, John, would you call it relative gloom today?
Relative gloom.
I like that.
Can you do that movie trailer voice, Tom? He was a dangerous man.
The journey of the dangerous man.
I never have done that before. Isaac Boltansky with us right now, BTIG Director of Policy Research. Isaac, I don't even know what caucusing is. John, Lisa, and I never caucus. House Democrats are caucusing at 10:30 a.m. What is a caucus? Do they meet at Starbucks?
We're good at caucusing down here. And by that, I mean just talking at one another rather than to one another. But you know, look, it's been a long day, Tom, and we're continuing from yesterday into today. But I'm of the view that we actually saw movement yesterday, not just motion.
Okay,
which has been all that we've seen for the past few weeks.
Physically, what do they do in a caucus? Is it a Zoom call? Are they all in the room together? Discuss what a caucus is.
It is an opportunity for members to share their thoughts and their opinions, even though ultimately whatever deal is going to get done here is going to be made in a very small group of folks.
Okay, so trust falls and kumbayas. There is a question. You said that there was progress made yesterday. Where?
Yeah, look, I think we saw both engagement and finally some clarity. Engagement in that we finally have the major stakeholders from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue talking and meeting and discussing relevant policies. But more importantly for us and investors is we got some clarity on the top line. You know, everyone knew that $3.5 trillion for the human or social infrastructure portion was never going to happen. And we finally have a bid-ask spread for that section. And so we know that now Senator Manchin, who's pivotal in all of this, has said that his top line is $1.5 trillion. And reportedly, Speaker Pelosi offer would be around $2.1 trillion. So we finally have realistic top line numbers, which has been lacking from the conversation since the start.
The problem with the top line numbers that we're talking about, particularly Joe Manchin's $1.5 trillion, is that it seems highly unlikely that the progressive wing will cave down to that, given some of the rhetoric. So are we just further away from progress, and perhaps we're further along in understanding that the gridlock is more pervasive and longer term?
Look, that is absolutely a fear within the Democratic caucus, but I am of the view that things in D.C. tend to be impossible right up until they're inevitable.
Yeah,
and I think it's fair to believe that Speaker Pelosi will once again be able to marshal her overall caucus to a final deal. And the reality for me, for what it's worth, is I think Democrats are realistically are aware that odds are they're going to lose the House next year, and that this is a moment where they have the pen and the capacity. And ultimately, something is better than nothing from their perspective.
Do liberals caucus different than moderates?
Sadly, I haven't been invited to either of these caucuses yet, but the minute I am, I'm coming back here to tell you all about it.
Going forward, Isaac, what are you looking for in terms of signs of true progress, not only with this debate, but frankly, the more impending one as we head toward October 18th, which is not defaulting on the U.S. debt?
Yeah, look, the way that I've described it to clients is Congress is going down the road. Thankfully, they avoided the pothole that is a government shutdown, right? That's easy. But it's kind of respectable because they've been texting while driving in multiple text groups, whether it's the moderates or progressives or the White House, regarding these infrastructure bills. But what scares me is that Mack truck that's known as the debt limit about a quarter mile down the road that's drifting into their lane.
Well,
so what?
No,
Sorry,
continue.
Yeah, so to me, what's important over the next 24 hours or so is to see if there's actual progress on the infrastructure deal. And by that, I mean getting a top line that everyone can agree on so that then we can move to the specifics of legislative text. And then we've got to focus on the debt ceiling, which ultimately I think it's going to be up to Democrats to move alone, which means that it's a 2-week process.
What does Bernie Sanders do with $1.5 trillion?
Look, the process that once we get a top line that's going to begin is a process of cutting and clipping, right? So we already can see some of these priorities falling to the wayside. So in that $2.1 trillion offer that the speaker put forward, there were things that were missing, right? We were no longer talking about free community college or affordable housing or Senator Sanders' plan regarding Medicare to let it offer dental, vision, and hearing benefits. So that's the cutting. And then on the clipping, things like making, for example, the child tax credit permanent. Instead of making it permanent, which is expensive, you could extend it for a year or two and then dare the next Congress to not reauthorize it. And I think that's the next phase of the discussions around reconciliation.
Isaac, love catching up with you, sir, and congratulations on the new seat. Really great to see you with the team at BTIG. Send our best to Julian Emanuel out there. Isaac Boltanski there, BTIG Director of Policy Research. Down in D.C., Tom, a choppy path ahead this morning, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I just don't get it. In all the literature I've read this morning, I have no idea how the liberals rationalize cutting and clipping to whatever. I mean, John, it's like the cutting and clipping at the surveillance caucus.
In fact, this is probably a little bit more efficient, Tom.
I think we should go to London. The three of us in London.
You want to go to London? I don't know where that's come from. Okay, let's start there. Why would you like to go to London?
So we can caucus better.
No, we can go. First of all, we can go, John, when you can go.
I can go from the start of November.
The first thing.
I can go and then I can fly back directly.
And there'll be no cutting and clipping. No
cutting and clipping. No, we fly straight in. Fly straight back, fully vaccinated.
This is our caucus right now, folks. You're watching.
Is it.
Enjoy. Productive.
Is that the only reason you want to go to London, or is there another reason?
No, I just want Lisa to bring the kids. It'll be great.
All right.
I don't know if Lisa wants to bring the kids.
I'll give them to you guys. It'll be great. John will talk about day trading with my older son.
They love that. They love that. The eldest loves that.
It's true. He does it. He does.
Can I just say?
You keep lobbying for it, okay?
John, it's the 40th anniversary of Bloomberg LP.
Isn't that great?
Today.
Isn't that something?
And I need to say good morning to Charles Gogolak, field goal kicker, who came out of an office once and said, "Keen, help me with this machine with the big green button."
They still regret it.
That's how
they still regret it.
Learned about the Bloomberg terminal.
Tom Keene.
40 years.
Lisa
Congratulations.
Brammett, Jonathan Ferrer.
Michael.
Congratulations to Mike and to everyone involved. Equity Futures.
Mike Bloomberg, not Mike McKee.
Of 1%.
Thanks
I think
for the
everyone got that, Tom. I think they got that. From New York, this is Bloomberg.
For the Jewish Communal Fund, past president Noel Spiegel.
People often ask me why it's important to use JCF for their charitable giving. I tell them that JCF has a profound impact on our community. Thanks to the revenue generated from our funds, JCF makes an annual $2 million grant to UJA Federation of New York and makes grants from our endowment, the Special Gifts Fund. This year, we proudly granted more than $800,000 to support a kosher food pantry at Mid-Island YJCC, Jewish daycare at the Ed Alliance, a renovation at Camp Oakhurst, and an intergenerational Holocaust program at Ramaz. I'd like you to hear about our impact from a past Special Gifts Fund recipient.
Plaza Jewish Community Chapel is most grateful to JCF for supplying seed money to start the organization. Almost 10,000 families have relied on Plaza to provide an affordable yet dignified Jewish funeral.
Let JCF maximize your impact. Visit jcfny.org or call 212-752-8277.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our #1 priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interests and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. S&P 500 closed down more than 1% at yesterday's trading. For the month, it fell nearly 5%. And futures this morning have turned around. We could see a higher open on Wall Street this morning. Lawmakers did manage to pass a stopgap spending bill to keep the government open till December 3rd. Well, next, they need to take action on the debt ceiling. Without an increase in the debt ceiling, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the U.S. government could default around October 18th. 1 in 4 companies have instituted a vaccine mandate for U.S. workers. According to the human resources consultant Gartner, another 13% of companies plan to put a mandate in place. And average mortgage rates this week topping 3% again, the highest since June. Summer may be over, but the maker of Coppertone sunscreen pulling 5 products off store shelves after finding benzene in its aerosol cans. This follows similar findings in products from Johnson & Johnson. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal. The buy side and the sell side together, collaborating across markets and countries in real time, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network of over 325,000 financial professionals that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Request a demo at bloomberg.com/professional.
It's not just work. It's an unfolding, ever-changing universe of characters.
Can we get out of the pandemic?
Bloomberg Business Week.
It's the app that made trading hard to resist.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio.
Live from New York City for our audience worldwide on TV and radio, kicking off Q4 with equities positive now by 0.5% on the S&P, advancing 21 points. That's your equity market. In the bond market, yields up a basis point, just south of 150. Your economic data about to drop. Mike McKee joins us now. Hey, Mike.
Well, it looks at this point like we are doing a little bit better than we anticipated in terms of income and spending. The spending numbers come in up 0.8%. That's better than the 0.3 we saw in July. These are August numbers. Incomes come in at 0.2. That's down from 1.1% in July. And here's an interesting thing. The revision in terms of the in the spending numbers, we thought it was 0.3. It was revised to a negative 0.1. So while we gain 0.1, we lose 0.2 in the 2-month average. And since this is all in the third quarter, it does bring down the overall spending level for the third quarter. The big number everybody wants to see, inflation. The PCE deflator goes up 0.4 at a headline level for the month, same as last month, same as July. The year-over-year figure puts us at 4.3%. That's 0.1 higher than we were. The core is up 0.3, and it is up 3.6% on the year, which is pretty much the same that we had the month before in July. So at this point, inflation still rising, incomes rising, and though the interesting thing here, the difference is that we're not seeing government transfer payments, but we are seeing wages rise. So that equals, they sort of equal themselves out in the month of August. Spending goes up in August, maybe the back to school stuff, but the overall inflation rate continues to rise.
Mike, the market not moving much off the back of this one, up 19 points on the S&P, as we were going into this print with positive 0.4%. Into the bond market with yields up about a basis point to 149.61, unchanged on 10s this morning. On 2s, unchanged too, just south of 30 basis points. Mike, it's onwards to ISM manufacturing a little bit later this morning.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens, John, because we saw European ISMs come in, or PMIs come in a little bit weaker, but still strong. It looks like we're running flat out, but there may be constraints because of supply chains. We'll see if that comes up in the United States as well.
Michael McKee, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate a whole bunch of further data. Michael McKee with a busy, busy morning. As John mentions, the ISM data, which I never paid attention to until Pharaoh told me to shut up and pay attention to it. The gloom this morning, the journey of gloom that we've been on into Q4 has been substantial. James Sweeney parachutes in less gloomy with Credit Suisse and their chief economist. James, I'm going to go right to where you went with your global note, which is Jay Pulaski at TPW is on the same page as James Sweeney. The gloom about Asia and China is overwrought. Discuss.
Well, Asia has contracted in industrial production terms since early this year. But as we got into early summer, it was contracting so significantly that it's likely things are going to get a little bit better in the near term. A lot of that weakness was due to idiosyncratic factors, short-term shutdowns of activity because of the virus, supply-side situations. Now, we might be short on chips relative to where we want to be globally for the next 18 months, but we're going to have periods where there's no chips and production can't happen, and periods where some's going to come in and production is going to be really fast. And I think late spring just happened to be a period where production really shut down and fell in Asia, and we're due for some short-term reacceleration. I think we've had a global trough in the growth rate of industrial production this summer, and it will be rebounding in the second half of the year, even though some of the troubles and worries about China and housing are significant over a longer period.
You have shown me over well in excess of 10 years a great optimism. You are a glass half full guy. Push against the summed gloom John, Lisa, and I have heard this morning.
Well, right now, economic data are all over the place because the pandemic has done strange things to the data. One of the strange things is that these PMIs, like the ISM today, have been much less correlated with industrial activity than they have. So one thing that drives me crazy is when I read in a newspaper that manufacturing just fell in country X because a survey fell by 2 points. Well, we have real data on manufacturing in that country, and basically the real data and the surveys have not been correlated. Actual production has been pretty weak, but in my view, actually it's going to be reaccelerating from here. Demand is strong, inventories are low, businesses are ready to invest globally. Yes, we're worried about further COVID. Yes, we're worried about China housing, but we should do better than we did in late Q2.
James, we're confusing the pace of the journey with the direction of travel. And Tom, that's what I want to hit on, because TK, I keep hearing the same word again and again and again this morning, stagflation.
Yes. Yeah, it's there. I mean, John, it's so good to have James Sweeney with us.
James, weigh in on that word that's getting thrown around at the moment so casually.
I mean, the pace of the journey, the markets move in the short run with the pace of the journey almost always. And the narratives and the fears move with the pace. Recently, the pace has been weak. So everyone's panicking now and telling doom and gloom stories. In terms of the destination where we're going, you're absolutely right. We're going up. Inventories are low. Demand is good. Social distancing is being reduced globally. And as the service sector comes back, employment will grow. As industrial production comes back and as these supply side issues gradually fix themselves, we're also going to have, downward pressure on some of these goods price inflation shocks that we've had. And almost all of these developments are different from ordinary kind of just after the recession type dynamics. The pandemic is weird. It's not a recession. It's an asterisk. It's a different kind of event. And we have to be careful in jumping to strong conclusions about strange behavior in PMIs or inflation or any of these indicators. And stagflation, don't get me started. It's a silly hypothesis.
Well, I want to start there, James, because I think it's important. It's a word that's being used. People are throwing it around. And let's be clear here. I'm not talking about just anyone. I'm talking about economists. PhD economists on Wall Street throwing that word around, confusing the pace of the journey with the direction of travel. How powerful is a word, even if it's being used in the wrong way?
Well, I mean, if you get some data surprises momentarily in the same direction as you're worried about significant downside risks, you could have big market moves, and markets can diverge from the reality meaningfully. But the bottom line is that GDP is actually growing decently in the U.S. and globally right now, is expected to continue to do that for the foreseeable future. And so there's a lot of growth. I mean, we're not at a level of activity that we're happy with yet. In industrial activity, it's actually, you're sort of there. In goods consumption, you're actually beyond there and probably coming down a little bit because they sent these huge checks out a few months ago. In services consumption, you're not there yet, and you're coming up because we have to end this pandemic and get some distancing. But when you add all that messy stuff up, you have good growth. You have good growth ahead, and you're going to return to a proper level of employment and a proper level of economic activity. I just don't see the contraction in that.
But James, this really does go back to the point of trying to compare, for example, Evergrande to 2008 or 2000s or 1998. And John was talking about why does it have to be such a catastrophic comparison rather than just something that could be negative but not necessarily potentially catastrophic. Are we talking about disinflation that could be really problematic for specific sectors, even if it's not exactly stagflation?
I mean, I think there's a margin story. I think for some sectors, I think these goods price overshoots are going to be coming down. So we're going to have less inflation in manufactured goods, in the next couple of years than we have now. It will be gradually falling. On the services side of the economy, maybe we're going to have high inflation in housing. Maybe we're going to have faster wage growth, higher inflation in in-person discretionary services. All of that together still is probably consistent with lower overall inflation. Is this something that, everyday people need to worry about? Like, not really. And it should be happening while we're in this bigger recovery. And hopefully, the Delta variant goes away, distancing comes off. And we just have a complicated normalization of economic activity, which each of these different parts of that normalization following its own special path. And it's a little bit, it's a little bit difficult to explain right now, but that's it. It's complicated.
Thanks so much, James Sweeney. John, can we have a vote right now? Sweeney's got to be on like every third day.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry.
We're all in. I just don't know if James wants to do that.
We just
Tom.
did a caucus.
It's not up to us.
We'll have a caucus.
It's up to the team at Credit Suisse, Tom.
Okay, thank you. I mean, John, I think that's really important what James Sweeney talks about, the stagflation comfortableness that's out there
that word's been thrown around so much, Tom.
Theory.
That word has been thrown around so much. James, do you think the Federal Reserve needs to step in here with a huge communication effort and really bat that one away?
No. I mean, I think right now the Fed's struggling to communicate that tapering doesn't necessarily mean hikes. I think that's the main challenge. This stagflation worry will become less significant once global industrial activity is clearly reaccelerating, which I think we will see by the end of the year. And once the Delta variant allows jobs growth in the U.S. to print a few more strong numbers.
Let's catch up soon. James Sweeney there, Credit Suisse chief economist, on this moment in America, Tom. And it is a fascinating moment. Don't get me wrong. Some of the dynamics playing out right now are not good. They're clearly not good for the likes of Nike, the likes of Bed Bath & Beyond. Got great demand. We just can't meet it with supply.
Those are, retail. I get it. I mean, we all get that. We all know Ed Ludlow's wonderful reporting off Los Angeles.
Sure.
The boats. And indeed, the boats outside New York City, I should point out as well. John, I've got to bring this up. He is 97 years old today, and anybody can have their thoughts on Jimmy Carter, the president, the time before the president. But, John, this is a guy who nailed it in college. He went to Naval Academy out of a math program in Georgia, excelled at the U.S. Navy, and was selected by Rickover in 1946 to invent the nuclear sub program. This photo from the Navy archive, I'm sorry, that's Jimmy Carter in the background. On radio, it's a shockingly young James Earl Carter.
Are we doing presidential birthdays now, Tom?
Yeah, that's a big deal, John. He's 97 years old.
I just wanted to get with the agenda, just to make sure that we were on the same page.
Can you imagine Lincoln alive in 1903 or whatever the math is?
Happy birthday to him.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to Mohammed Al-Arian at some point, too.
Tom Keane, Lisa
You're
Bramlett.
speaking with him, right?
Dr.
That was a month ago.
Birthday,
that was in the back end of August. You guys missed it. That's why he's joining me at 9 o'clock in 19 minutes' time. Mohammed Al-Arian joining me at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Mohammed, apparently happy birthday for something that happened in the middle of August.
For his birthday, maybe the Jets will win.
From New York City, this is Bloomberg.
Now with the latest news from New York City and around the world, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, Lisa, John. Pharmaceutical company Merck says its experimental COVID-19 pill reduced hospitalizations and deaths by half in people recently infected with the coronavirus. The company said it would soon ask health officials in the U.S. and around the world to authorize its use. Speaking to ABC, Merck CEO Robert Davis said it is the first oral antiviral drug available for COVID-19.
This is a pill. You can take it home, and it will significantly reduce the risk that you either ultimately are hospitalized or, more importantly, that you would ever face the unfortunate outcome of death.
Merck CEO Robert Davis called the pill a game changer. The study results were released by the company and have not been peer-reviewed. The battle over President Biden's agenda continues. Progressives in the House maintain that they will vote against the trillion-dollar bipartisan infrastructure plan unless Congress can pass the president's second, much larger package. That one has funding for a range of initiatives like paid family leave, subsidized child care, and fighting climate change. Democrats are reportedly meeting for talks this morning. Democratic Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who is a progressive, said that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi won't bring a bill to the floor if she knows it's going to fail.
I don't think we have the votes to just bring up one bill. So, and the speaker understands that. And so I'm confident that she's going to find a path forward because she's working very hard and she always does the right thing.
Representative Lee spoke to ABC. The Biden administration can continue expelling migrant families under a pandemic-related public health order, Title 42. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studios, this is Global News, 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
This is your...
The world's financial decision makers connect on the Bloomberg terminal, sharing ideas, negotiating trades, and forming an influential network that helps power global markets. Isn't it time you join them? Bloomberg.com/professional.
Bloomberg Real Estate Report, brought to you by Exogen. A lot of optimism about 3D printing in the construction business.
We're able to print exactly what we need, so it's effectively zero waste construction.
Sam Rubin, co-founder of Mighty Homes, says that means eliminating the 3 to 5 pounds per square foot that goes to landfill in traditional building. 3D printing uses machines to lay down thin layers of material according to digital blueprints. And Jason Ballard, founder and CEO of 3D printing home builder Icon, says printing on site saves a lot in terms of shipping costs.
The factory comes to you and prints the house right where it intends to be.
3D printing homes can also help ease the huge labor shortage in the home building industry and help get the homes that people need to market. But the 3D printed home business still faces huge challenges, including ramping up production and convincing people that 3D printed homes are safe. And that's your Bloomberg Real Estate Report. I'm Denise Pellegrini.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Connecting decision makers to a network of news and financial information 24 hours a day. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
A bipartisan infrastructure bill was supposed to come up for a vote in the House last night, but it didn't. And now Peter Alexander has more on what's next.
No deal this morning after late-night negotiations on the Hill failed to break a logjam between progressive and moderate Democrats. The White House and Democratic leaders from both the House and Senate still trying to hammer out a compromise that would make President Biden's domestic agenda a reality.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has said the House will try again to vote on the measure today. The nation is inching closer to yet another dark milestone as October begins. Nearly 700,000 people have lost their battle with coronavirus. About half of those deaths happened in just the past 9 months due to the surging Delta variant. And there's a hearing today on a new abortion law in Texas. The Justice Department filed a lawsuit after the ban began this month. It says women can't end their pregnancy after 6 weeks before many know they're pregnant, and allows anyone to sue a doctor who performs the procedure. I'm Michael Kastner.
For some people, studying the markets is the best part of their day.
What have been the hits and the misses?
When we say some people, we mean these people.
Do they have similar pricing power?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio.
We are working with our supply partners to gradually improve this situation. What the big chip makers are saying is that the constraints will be with us also throughout the year of 2022, but we're hoping on a better level than what we have experienced during this year.
It is about design. Ola Kalnas, Daimler CEO, as they try to figure out design forward and the engineering under the hood at Mercedes-Benz. This is a joy, and it is a particular joy as Bloomberg today recalibrated our iPhone sales guesstimates forward. And basically, Anurag Raga and John Butler said the streets got it wrong. iPhone sales are booming. They are booming because of the confluence of engineering and interior design, industrial design, I should say. James Dyson joins us, and some would argue it's Steve Jobs learned it all from Dyson. He's the Dyson founder and chief engineer. Full disclosure, I have a vacuum. James Dyson, invention of life. And we're thrilled that Sir James could join us this morning. Sir James, when you see the success of what Jobs did with his aesthetic, what do you think of the iPhone is so much an equivalent of your design and engineering ability?
Well, I don't think I really compare the two. I mean, one's a phone, almost a piece of jewelry, and ours is a machine that does things, a mechanical machine. I mean, increasingly we use software, artificial intelligence, and so on. But it's ours is a tool, a machine that you use, rather than a piece of jewelry.
The original machine, and I remember my father talking about this, was a wheelbarrow which broke every rule. We had an axis and an XY space, and Dyson said, no, think XYZ space as on the edge of spherical geometry. When you figured out the ball barrow, what was the response? How much grief did you get?
Well, the idea really was that it didn't sink into soft ground, because wheelbarrows tend to be used on building sites and at home in the backyard on soft ground. And it's stupid to have a narrow wheel, which is what most of them have. So I did this huge ball wheel. And then the bin on wheelbarrows is a rather open bin, incapable of holding cement safely inside it. So I did a sort of dumper truck shaped bin. I just rethought the wheelbarrow from the ground up, as it were. But it's really quite a simple product. And we got 50% market share with it. So it did quite well.
So, James, you wrote this book at a pivotal moment in the entire labor economy and, frankly, on the precipice of the technological revolution that's going to accelerate to a new level. What would you say going forward is the biggest challenge for the next innovation, the next Dyson vacuum cleaner, or whether it's the iPhone? How do you foster that type of innovation?
Well, that's a very good point. I mean, I think we should be encouraging more and more young people to become engineers and scientists. We're all talking about all the problems that exist at the moment, the obvious ones. And it's engineers and scientists that can solve these problems. And the young, particularly, are passionate about these issues. Using less electricity, saving the world, using less fuel, and so on, and finding a different form of plastic, something to replace plastic. So, and engineers and scientists can solve this. But I think that historically, very few of us have wanted to become engineers and scientists, partly because it's difficult and it's hard, but also because somehow it's never seen as glamorous. It's never seen as something that interests ordinary people. But it jolly well is now. Greta Thunberg has made it an interesting subject.
So, James, where in the world do you think that engineers are being most supported from an early age? And I speak of this as we do talk increasingly of the tech wars between the U.S. and China.
Well, obviously, a huge number vast number of engineers are being produced in China, but also in India. I mean, Pune, just one city in India, for example, produces 40,000 engineers a year, which is actually more than we produce in England, the whole of Great Britain. So, I think on the whole, so-called developed countries are much worse at producing engineers and scientists than developing countries. For example, the Philippines produce more engineers than Britain. And then, in the United States, there's 19 lawyers for every one engineer. So we've got to do something about it. So what we've been doing, we've been working in schools, actually been working in some schools in Chicago, but a lot of schools in England over a number of years. And we've tried to improve design and technology teaching in schools. So bringing real products into schools and encouraging children to solve problems, to see engineering design as problem solving.
Sir James, please give us an update on Brexit. The last time I talked to you, you were up on a soapbox telling us, let's go England, let's separate. Give us the Dyson update on the success of Brexit.
Well, you've got to give it a chance, because we can't change laws and get rid of red tape, European standards and all things overnight. That will happen over time. But a very good example of the success of Brexit is Britain's development of the AstraZeneca vaccine, was developed at Oxford, done totally independently, whereas the European programme hasn't produced a vaccine yet. So I think that's a very good example of Britain going on its own, living by its wits and doing things independently. We've signed a lot of trade deals, not with you yet, unfortunately, but we've signed a lot of trade deals around the world. And I see it as a psychological change more than anything else. We can go on trading. We can go on trading with Europe, as we have done for hundreds of years, and just as we did before we joined the EU, and as we are now. So trade isn't really the issue. I think it's more a psychological issue and an issue of sovereignty. The issue of sovereignty is the greatest issue, I think, and that's what determined it in the end.
Sir James, we're going to have to leave
the United States wouldn't want to be subservient to Canadian law, for example.
Very good. Sir James, thank you so much. Sir James Dyson, folks, the new book, James Dyson, Invention, a Life. Lisa, it is about engineering and design, and I'm sorry that I take the linkage here between what Steve Jobs did, so much influenced by what Sir James did.
And this is really the next section of the labor economy. I mean, people are looking for a surge in productivity that's going to come with more innovation. What is the next Apple? What is the next big tech that's going to drive things forward materially, Tom?
Yeah, we've got a headline coming out. We must touch on this. This is at the Supreme Court where we have a COVID issue, Lisa.
Well, we have Justice Kavanaugh testing positive for COVID-19, but she has got no symptoms and she has been fully vaccinated. Honestly, this to me highlights the conundrum for businesses. Do you test people who are vaccinated, and what do you do with that if somebody has been fully vaccinated and has no symptoms? I mean, this goes to the vagaries of science in terms of transmission, but we are finding out that Justice Kavanaugh has tested positive. And just to give you a sense of what the potential implications are, Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court opens with the first arguments in a term. So it's a question of whether this might hamper that. But in an era of Zoom, I guess there are other accommodations.
Brett Kavanaugh, age 56 with COVID.
Yes, he was tested positive.
Continue. Green up here. We had a real reversal in the market. Futures up 10. Dow futures up 95. The VIX at 24 level comes in nicely, 22.67. Please stay with us through the morning. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
NJIT